There is a conference, the past participle as an adverb to describe subject indirectly. This is applied to understand the abbreviation of the relative pronoun and the be verb. If the past participle has the trait as an adjective and a subordinate clause stated in the passive voice of the speaker, we can understand the phenomenon that the relative pronoun that has the role as a subject in the subordinate clause and the be verb to reveal that the precedent and the main clause is described by the adjective, that is the past participle, that has the role as a subjective complement, and the subordinate clause, the precedent and the main clause, can be described by the past participle in the subordinate clause that has the trait as an adjective and the role as a subjective complement. Directly is the combination of the relative pronoun that has the role as a subject in the subordinate clause and the be verb to describe the existence of the subject is abbreviated. Let's start to study about the past participle as an adverb to describe subjects indirectly. There's a clause, you have greeted me. The past participle greeted specifies the definition of the intransitive verb have to describe that the experience of the subject exists. So the past participle greeted indirectly describes the subject. There is a conference, the present participle is an adverb to describe subject indirectly. In a sentence that the main clause is linked by the subordinate clause by the relative pronoun. This description is helpful to understand the abbreviation of the relative pronoun and be verb to describe the precedent in the main clause, which indicate the same subject or object as the relative pronoun. The subject indicated by the relative pronoun in the subordinate clause and the be verb to describe the subject indicated by the relative pronoun and the subordinate clause can be abbreviated. The subject in the subordinate clause described by the be verb indicates the same subject or object in the main clause. So the speaker can abbreviate the combination of the relative pronoun that has the role as a subject in the subordinate clause and the be verb, which is described by the present participle with the trait as an adverb because the subordinate clause is stated in the progressive tense, as the relative pronoun that indicates the subject of the subordinate clause, and the be verb are abbreviated. The present participle that had the trait as an adverb to specify the definition of the be verb changes its trait into an adjective from the fact that the present participle is a term for a form, the combination of the verb as a root and the suffix ing. So we can understand that the present participle whose trait becomes an adjective describes the precedent in the main clause directly. We will study about the present participle as an adverb to describe the subject indirectly in a clause. There is a clause, you are greeting me. The speaker can emphasize the existence of the listeners as a subject in a way to specify the definition of the be verb are with the present participle greeting that has the trait as an adverb. So the listeners can understand that the listeners who are the subjects in a condition that is a point in the present are described in the detailed way because the point at the present when the listeners exist is extended into a period when the subject continues the condition described by the transitive verb greet. The present participle greeting specifies the definition of the be verb, which is one of the intransitive verbs to describe the existence of the subjects who are listeners. So the present participle greeting indirectly describes the subject. The present participle greeting is applied to emphasize the existence of those listeners who are subject in this clause. If the speaker states this clause in the present simple tense, the listeners can understand the similar intent of the speaker without the emphasis that the condition of the listeners lasts during a period. The speaker can convey the intention close to the original intention without the effect of the emphasis by the present participle with the clause stated in the simple tense. So the present participle greeting has the trait of the adverb. There is a clause stated in the present simple tense, you greet me. We can find the only verb in the clause stated in the present progressive tense as the be verb to describe the existence of the subject primarily. We can find the only verb in this clause as the transitive verb greet to describe the condition of the listeners as the subject. there is a conference. The past participle as an adjective to describe the subject, directly. The present participle that has the trait as an adjective describes the subject directly. This could be understood from the fact that the way that speakers state a clause on the focus of the object in the subject-object relationship is the only one. To focus on the perspective of the object in the subject-object relationship mediated by the transitive verb greet, is the only one. It's the only way. The subject of this clause receive the condition described by the transitive verb greet from an unstated subject. The unstated subject starts and gives the definition of the transitive verb greet to the listeners as the object in this subject-object relationship. The speaker focuses on this subject-object relationship from the perspective of the object who are the listeners. So we can understand that the description by the past participle greeted reveals that the listeners are the object in the hidden subject-object relationship. Because the past participle is applied to focus on the latter part of the interaction between the subject-object relationship. The speaker states this clause in the perspective of the object who gets the action indicated by the transitive verb greet with a passive voice. The condition that the listeners who are the subject in the clause get the action indicated by the transitive verb greet can only be stated in the passive voice. The way of description that the speaker speaks in the passive voice cannot be replaced by the other way, so we can understand that the past participle greeted is the trait as an adjective that has the role as a subjective complement. The subjective complement is a constituent of a clause. The past participle greeted describes the subject and the clause with the trait of the adjective because the past participle greeted does not convey the emphasized or additional intention of the speaker with the trait of the adverb. So this clause describes the existence of the listeners who get the action indicated by the transitive verb greet. In this clause, the only verb is the be verb. So we can understand that the speaker describes the existence of the subject at first, and we can understand the existence of the listeners is specified with the application of the adjective greeted, so that the definition of the be verb is deepened into revealing the condition of the subject.